Hello, my name is Denise Vrchota. I'm a member of the 3MT Planning Committee, and this series of slides will help you to organize your 3MT presentation. It will also give you some suggestions about topics you should discuss during your presentation. The 3MT purpose is to give you a wonderful opportunity to present your research in ways that a non-specialist audience would be able to understand, and you have a maximum of 3 minutes for this research. The judging criteria of 3-minute thesis is found in the red print in the center of this slide. In other words, the judges will be listening for you to discuss background information about your research, to define the way that you have chosen to approach your research, and to discuss the impact that your research has. In addition to including these topics into your presentation, you'll also have to begin your presentation or introduce it in some way, and you'll have to conclude it in a memorable manner. And so we'll talk about those things as well. So what we're going to do is begin with the background of your presentation, and then we'll focus on strategy and impact. The background section of your presentation tells your audience why your research needs to be conducted. There are 2 levels that you should be prepared to discuss your research, the personal and the global level. The personal level works to create an emotional connection to your audience, and the way you do that, there are actually 2 ways. Through your words, you can either tell a story or give an example, and that story or example could be authentic or it could be fabricated. But if you fabricate, or that is, if you make up the story or the example, be sure that you let your audience know. So you might say something along the lines of, imagine with me, and then go ahead and tell your story or give your example. So besides your words, the other way that you're going to make the emotional connection is through a visual. You will be using one slide. We're not going to talk about the slide in this part of the Canvas site, but there is another video that discusses slides that I would urge you to watch. At any rate, on your slide, I would suggest having a small visual that supports your words. For example, let's say that your research is about alleviating world hunger. You might have a visual on your slide that shows a child with an empty bowl. So when you're finished with your words and you've displayed your visual, summarize the personal relevance of what you've just said. The other type of background you should be prepared to discuss is global background, or the big picture. How will your research alleviate a global need, something that pertains to the global community? And I would suggest that in order to develop this part of your background, that you cite statistics or give a quote that emphasizes the need for research in your area. Be sure, of course, that you give the source of your statistics or your quote, and I would also establish the credentials of those sources. And then when you've done that, just as you did with the personal background, be sure that you summarize what you've said about the global need. Now, on the slide, even though I have the personal need and the global need in this order, you don't have to talk about them in this order in your presentation. Which of these do you feel is going to have the greatest influence on your audience? Choose that to discuss first, and then go ahead and discuss the other. So now that your audience understands why your research needs to be conducted, tell them how you intend to go about conducting it. And that's where we get into the strategy or the design. Now, the strategy, that word strategy might be confusing, but basically what you're doing in this section of your speech is to describe the approach that you are going to use to conduct your research. And to do that, first of all, explain your research approach. Tell why you've chosen this particular approach. For example, maybe no one has ever used this approach to discuss your research question, and you believe there are some strengths in using this approach. So explain those. And then finally, what are the results of your research, or what do you anticipate would be the results in using this particular approach to investigate your research question? Now, notice I've said results or expected results. You do not need to have results. But if you don't, be sure that you discuss the anticipated or expected results. Two things I'd like to close the discussion of this section with. Number one, remember that you're speaking to a non-specialist audience. You're speaking to an audience who may have little to no familiarity with your research topic. And I think you also need to be prepared that they would have little to no familiarity with the research process. So give some thought to the way that you can explain your research approach in ways that they would understand. That's the first thing. The second thing, again, remember that you have only 3 minutes for this presentation. So commit the smallest amount of those 3 minutes to this section, the strategy design. After you finish discussing that, the final section of your presentation will discuss the practical application of your research, both personally and globally, in non-specialist terms. So personally, how will your research have a positive impact on the lives of your audience members? Globally, how will your research benefit the world? So these two things are familiar to you. We talked about these when we talked about background, but something a little bit different. For the impact section of your presentation, save whichever you feel is going to be most important, the personal or the global impact. Save that until last. And the reason is that audience members tend to remember the last things they heard in a speech. So if you feel that the global impact is the most important, then you're going to discuss that last, and you're going to discuss the personal impact first, or vice versa. So what we've just talked about are the 3 sections that you should include and discuss in your speech. Why is there a need for your research? How will you go about conducting the research? And what do you expect will be the impact of your results? You will still need to introduce your research in some way. And because you have only 3 minutes, my suggestion would be that you consider integrating the background section into your introduction. So how will you do this? First of all, either deliver a statement or ask a question that will attract your audience's attention, that will make them want to hear your presentation. So I briefly used an example about your research alleviating world hunger. What you might say to attract your audience's attention might be something like, "I'm hungry. Are you hungry? I bet we both know where our next meal is coming from." And then proceed into your background section. Then, for concluding your speech in a memorable manner, again, because you have only 3 minutes, I'd suggest integrating the impact section into your conclusion. So how should you do that? Make a statement or ask a question that signals to your audience that you're beginning to transition into the ending, the conclusion of your speech. And so you might say something, again, continuing with our example of world hunger, something like, "I hope that you can see when we refer to world hunger that we're also referring to local hunger." Then move into your impact section, and remember, you're going to use whichever exerts the greatest impact for your takeaway. So you're going to say that last. And then close with a very brief concluding statement, maybe along the lines of, now, as a result of my research, everyone in the world will know where their next meal is coming from. And by the way, if you're wondering, well, what can I use for this brief concluding statement? Look to your attention grabber. What was the first thing you said? And then tie that into your concluding statement. So I hope that having listened to this set of slides, that you have some ideas about how to approach the development of your 3-minute thesis presentation, how to know which sections you should include in your presentation, and also some suggestions for the types of things that you should discuss in each of those sections. I wish you the very best of luck with your 3-minute thesis presentation. I hope that I'll be able to see it. Good luck.